I have been waiting for this! First things first, stop calling him Black Mozart! I mean, yeah, he was a master composer, but he was also a master fencer, master violinist, master marksman. Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges. His life should already been a movie. He was born on the island of Guadeloupe in 1745 on Christmas Day to a beautiful Senegalese woman named Nanon. But she was enslaved by a minor nobleman who ends up being Joseph's father. But he did claim him, and when the father moved to France, he took Joseph with him and enrolled him in the fencing school. If you lived in France in the 1700s and you had money, you fenced. Everyone fenced. That was it. 2 years later, he's one of the best in the school, which is not cool. Yeah, this ain't right after slavery. This is the 18th century. Slavery's still booming. Now you got a black kid excelling in a French nobleman sport? Nah, he's getting challenged. And not regular challenges from like Pierre at the school up the block, nah. He gets challenged by legendary fencing master Alexandre Picard. And he beats him. So now he's famous. And this is when Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges really starts to get into music. And I'm gonna have to tell you that in part 2. I know I said this already, but stop calling him Black Mozart. Joseph Bologne is one of Europe's finest swordsmen by the time he's 21, so when he's declared a knight, he becomes Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Now he's famous, tall, dark, and handsome, and there's some assassination attempts, but he had hands. Hands that he used to play the violin really, really well. He was so good that his teacher dedicated some of his pieces to him. Plays first violin in France's biggest orchestra, playing concertos that he composed himself. And 2 years later, he's directing that orchestra. One day he gets a letter with the royal seal inviting him to the palace, signed by Marie Antoinette, who starts getting lessons from him. So when it's time for the Paris Opera to get a new director, Saint-Georges is the obvious choice. Even the king thought so. He came highly recommended by Marie Antoinette. I mean, you can't blame her. But then 3 of the opera's divas write this letter to the king, and even though no one else is qualified, they don't hire him. Or anyone, they just leave it open. Later, he's living in someone's mansion, and another musician comes to live there too. A young Mozart. Part 3. Alright, this is why I say stop calling him Black Mozart. 1, it's racist. 2, Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges was already a legit established musician before Mozart. He had already helped create a genre of music, symphony concertatas. Remember that, it's important. Saint-Georges was one of the people living in a mansion when Mozart came to stay there. We don't know if they interacted, but we do know that Mozart heard Saint-Georges' second violin concerto. Mozart's next composition after leaving France is a symphony concertatas, and you can hear Saint-Georges' influence.
It goes all the way up, the fingerboard, and then he drops all the way down here.
Sounds like this. And the St. George Concerto, Opus 5, number 2, goes... There is a difference, it's half a tone higher. Mozart's in E flat and he's in E major. But they're identical and they're not typical passages used at the time.
Nobody was writing at the upper register like that and then shooting all the way back down. That was on George's style.
And Mozart was never the colonel of Europe's first all-black military regiment. That was St. George, tell you. He is the most accomplished man in Europe in writing, running, shooting, fencing, dancing, music. He will hit the button, any button, on the coat or waistcoat of the greatest masters. He will hit the crown piece in the air with a pistol ball. From the personal diary of US President John Adams referencing Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Where's my hand? Now, when you're one of the best everything in Europe, you make friends like Philippe de Lyon. He introduces Saint-Georges to the Reformation movement, and this is when he really starts to get into politics and abolishing slavery. So when the French Revolution rolls around, he shows up to fight, and they give him a command. And when word gets out that Saint-Georges is looking for soldiers, hundreds of black people across France show up to fight for him. Even a bunch of newly self-liberated Haitians show up to fight in Légion Saint-Georges. His lieutenant, Alexandre Dumas, whose son wrote The Count of Monte Cristo. They stopped an Austrian invasion and would have gotten recognized, but the French Revolution was a mess. If you were an aristocrat, you got the guillotine, and Saint-Georges had spent way too much time around aristocrats. They threw him in jail to be executed, but a year later they released him and let him live. He pretty much laid low for the rest of his life, but we should know who he is. Now we do.